Welcome back to Investing Talk podcast. We're going to dive deep into Ocean Group today.
Ocean Group.
You sent in a whole bunch of analyst reports and financial news on this one, and
Yeah,
it looks like a really interesting company. We're going to sift through all this stuff, try to figure out what it all means for you.
sound good.
So this is kind of your shortcut to understanding Ocean Group.
All right.
Let's get right into it. The current price is hovering around 8.36.
Okay.
It's been up a little bit lately, but when you look at the longer term trend,
Yeah.
over the past year, the stock's down about 39%.
Hmm.
What do you think about that contrast between the short term and the long term?
Well, the stock market often reacts to the short-term news, and maybe there's been some positive news lately about Golden Ocean, or maybe just about the shipping sector in general. But when you're looking at a longer-term decline like that 39% over the past year, you're probably talking about some more fundamental factors.
Yeah.
Maybe, changes in global trade patterns or demand for the raw materials that Golden Ocean ships, like iron ore and coal.
Okay.
You always have to consider the broader economic picture, too. If there are concerns about global economic growth, that's going to impact the amount of goods being shipped around the world.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So you've got these kind of short-term little blips, but the longer-term trend is really driven by these bigger forces.
Exactly.
One of the things that really stood out to me going through this information was Golden Ocean's really strong emphasis on dividends.
Yeah, their dividend's pretty impressive.
Over $1.1 billion returned to shareholders since 2021. That's a lot of money.
It is.
And the current dividend yield is very high, around 13.7%. So if you're an investor who's looking for income, that could be pretty appealing.
For sure.
But they also have a share buyback program in place.
Right.
So how do those two strategies, dividends and buybacks, usually impact a company and its stock price?
Well, both dividends and buybacks are ways of returning value to shareholders, but they work a little differently. Dividends are those straight-up cash payments. And if a company has a consistently high dividend yield, like Golden Ocean does, it can be a sign that they're profitable and that they're committed to sharing those profits with their investors.
Okay.
Share buybacks, on the other hand, that's where the company actually goes out and buys back some of its own shares.
Yeah.
And when they do that, it reduces the total number of shares that are outstanding, which can actually make each remaining share a little more valuable because now the earnings are divided among a smaller number of shares.
No, okay.
And sometimes companies will do buybacks if they believe that their stock is undervalued by the market. So, by using both of these strategies, Golden Ocean could be trying to appeal to a wider range of investors. Some investors might be more interested in that steady income from dividends, while others might prefer the potential for stock price appreciation from the buybacks.
Interesting. So Golden Ocean's trying to keep everybody happy.
It seems like it, yeah.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the company's fleet. They are the largest listed owner of Capesize vessels.
Capesize, wow.
And their fleet is relatively young. And for anyone listening who's not familiar with shipping lingo,
Right.
Capesize vessels are the big boys.
Yeah, huge.
They're the ones that are carrying massive amounts of iron ore and coal, usually on long international routes.
Right.
So why is it so important in this industry to have a younger fleet?
Well, newer ships tend to be more fuel efficient, and fuel is a huge expense in the shipping industry. And they also usually require less maintenance, and they're more likely to meet those stricter environmental regulations that we're seeing more and more of. So having a younger fleet can really give Golden Ocean a leg up on the competition.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
Now, Golden Ocean is really focused on these Capesize vessels, so that means that their performance is going to be pretty closely tied to global demand for iron ore and coal. And those commodities are really driven by industrial activity, especially in places like China.
Exactly.
So that specialization, it could be good if demand is strong, but it also makes them more vulnerable if demand weakens.
For sure, it's a double-edged sword.
We also saw that there was a CEO transition coming up in May of this year.
Oh, interesting.
And even without knowing all the details, how can a change in leadership sometimes affect a company's stock?
Yeah, well, anytime you have a change at the top, it creates a little uncertainty.
Yeah.
Investors want to know what the new CEO's vision is.
Right.
Are they going to make any big changes to the company's strategy?
Yeah.
How are they going to handle things like operational efficiency?
Okay.
And so, depending on how the market perceives the new CEO and their plans,
Yeah.
it can definitely have an impact on the stock price.
All right. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the financials.
Okay.
Over the past 12 months, Golden Ocean had revenue of $968.42 million
All right.
and a net income of $223.21 million, and their debt-to-equity ratio is 57%. Now, one of the things that your sources flagged as a potential concern was high debt,
Yeah.
especially given that the stock price has dropped so much in the past year. So for listeners who might not be familiar with this ratio,
Huh?
debt to equity, it basically tells you how much of a company is financed by debt compared to equity.
Right.
So what are some of the risks when a shipping company is carrying a lot of debt?
Well, 57% isn't insanely high, but in an industry like shipping, which is very cyclical, it goes up and down with the economy,
Yeah.
it's definitely something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
And the fact that your sources flagged it as a concern means that it's on the radar.
Yeah.
The main problem with high debt is that it can really hurt you when the market takes a downturn. Because if shipping rates start to fall and your revenue drops, you still have to make those interest payments on your debt.
Oh, okay.
And that can eat into your profits. It could also make it harder for you to invest in new ships or take advantage of growth opportunities. So when you see a company like Golden Ocean with a fair amount of debt and a stock price that's been declining, it can be a sign that investors are a little worried about their ability to manage those financial obligations.
That makes sense. Okay. So there's some potential downsides here, but it's not all doom and gloom. The dividend yield is a big positive, as we discussed.
Right.
And one of your sources said that the stock might actually be undervalued right now when you look at its price-to-book ratio compared to the industry average.
Interesting.
And just to explain that a little bit, the price-to-book ratio basically compares the market value of a company to the value of its assets. So if that ratio is lower than average, it can sometimes be a sign that the stock is a bargain.
Okay.
Golden Ocean is a major player in dry bulk shipping, but they're not the only game in town.
Right.
Who are some of their main competitors?
Well, you've got companies like Star Bulk Carriers. They also operate a very large fleet and have a good reputation in the industry. You've got Safe Bulkers. They tend to focus on slightly smaller vessels than Golden Ocean.
Okay.
And then there's Eagle Bulk Shipping. They have a more diversified fleet.
All right, so what sets Golden Ocean apart from these other companies?
Well, I think their main differentiator is their focus on those Capesize vessels. They're really the dominant player in that segment.
Yeah.
And, as we discussed, that makes them very sensitive to the demand for iron ore and coal. If those commodities are doing well, Golden Ocean is likely to do well. But if those markets weaken, it can hurt them more than some of their competitors who are more spread out.
Okay, so looking ahead then, what are some of the things that could really boost Golden Ocean stock?
Well, their next earnings report is coming out in May 2025. So if those earnings are better than expected, that could definitely give the stock a lift.
Okay.
Also, if we see a surge in global trade or a big increase in demand for raw materials, maybe due to strong economic growth, that would also be very positive for Golden Ocean.
All right, on the flip side, what are some of the risks out there?
Well, one thing to keep an eye on is environmental regulations. Those are only getting stricter, and it could force shipping companies to invest in new technologies or cleaner fuels, which would obviously increase their costs.
Okay.
And then there's always the risk of a global economic slowdown.
Yeah.
If that happens, demand for commodities would likely fall, shipping rates would drop, and Golden Ocean would definitely feel the pain.
Okay, so let's wrap things up here. We've got this recent small price increase.
Yeah.
But the longer-term trend has been down.
Right.
We've got this very attractive dividend yield.
But
they also have a fair amount of debt.
Right.
They're a strong player in their market, but there are some potential challenges out there.
Yeah.
So taking all of this into account, one of your sources recommended a hold on the stock. So for our listeners out there, if you're a long-term investor, maybe someone who's really interested in that dividend income, how does that hold recommendation sit with you?
Well, I think it makes sense. That high dividend yield is definitely tempting, but you have to weigh that against the risks, the debt level, and the fact that the stock's been underperforming.
Yeah.
So I think if you're a long-term investor, you'd really want to keep a close eye on Golden Ocean.
Okay.
Make sure that they can keep paying those dividends. Make sure they're managing their debt effectively.
Yeah.
Because the market can be unpredictable.
And what about someone who's looking for shorter-term gains? What signals might they be looking for?
Well, that recent price bump doesn't necessarily mean that the stock is about to take off.
Yeah.
They'd probably want to see some more convincing evidence of an upward trend. Maybe a sustained move, above a certain price level,
Uh-huh.
or a big jump in trading volume, something to show that there's some real momentum building.
Okay. So to sum it all up, Golden Ocean is a company with both opportunities and risks. That high dividend might be alluring, but you have to consider the debt and the overall market conditions.
Absolutely.
It's a complex picture.
Yeah,
And as always, staying informed and doing your own research is essential.
right.
Hopefully this conversation has given you a good starting point for understanding Golden Ocean Group.
Absolutely. And for those of you listening, I'm curious what you think.
Yeah.
What are your takeaways from all of this?
Yeah.
What questions do you still have? Be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a comment with your thoughts.
Yeah, we always love hearing from you. And if you find any other interesting information about Golden Ocean, please share it with us.
We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everyone.